Good afternoon. This week's episode of Level Up Cyber Live. My name is Tony Bryan. I am your host, and today I'm excited to welcome Jon Brandt. Jon, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
Super excited about today's discussion. But before we jump in, Jon, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Obviously, I know who you are, but I'd love to have you introduce yourself to the group.
Sure thing. So Jon Brandt, Director of Professional Practices at ISACA, global headquartered out of Schaumburg, Illinois. Been with them 8.5 years. I oversee thought leadership for IT audit, risk, privacy, emerging technology, IT, information security, and now governance, as well as oversee development of our performance-based exam items.
So for those that aren't familiar with ISACA, you want to dive a little deeper into it? I mean, you guys do a ton of research and data, and you guys
Sure.
do a lot, but, I'd love to, dive in a little deeper to,
Absolutely.
ISACA.
So ISACA is a member association, right? So for those of mostly seasoned IT professionals recognize us for the CISM, CISA, C-Risk, and C-Guide certifications. We do have some certificate programs for early learners. We did send the first complete performance cybersecurity exam to market several years ago. Beyond that, and again, so global footprint, believe it's well over 175,000 members. We've got tons of chapters across the globe. I actually could not do what I do without the selflessness of just a myriad of awesome volunteers that are always willing to contribute back to the industry. So besides the certifications and preparatory materials, we do put out survey reports. And our most recent initiative is actually this concept of digital trust and in our pursuit of that, and how all the practice areas that we're responsible to all fit into that, and actually work to serve to create a safer digital ecosystem.
A safer digital ecosystem. I like it. I feel like a t-shirt maybe.
Yeah.
And then you and I have been hanging out for a couple of years now, and I think we've always enjoyed the discussions. I feel like you and I have very similar approaches and philosophies and just this overall concept of workforce. So I know we've had multiple sessions where we've moaned and complained about all of the problems that we're seeing, right? And then of course we have all the solutions. So if people would just listen to us, we would
Exactly.
we would all be better off at the end of the day. But I don't know that I can back that up. But you've got an interesting, I think, career path to get to where you're at, right? So I'd love, it's always one of the top kind of questions that people get is, for these sessions is, how did you get into the industry of cyber, and what did your career path look like for you?
Sure thing. So I actually got into cyber through the military. Not surprising. A lot of us get that way. So I'm a 20-year Navy veteran. I had actually went into the Navy. Some recruiter told me I was going to be like James Bond, or he just straight up lied to me, right? So classified RF based, radio communications, and the whole, through the course of my career, technology it exploded, right? Took off. So analog radios transitioned to computer networks, which then, as the Navy in particular kind of codified its workforce and everything, I was kind of uniquely positioned within the classified IT infrastructure environment, then transitioned to cyber. So I've been a technical trainer of IT related people. I've been an information security manager on board an aircraft carrier, 3 networks, 5,100 users, program management, you name it, I've done it. Workforce placement for some, Intel based agencies out of the greater DC area. Took a little hiatus after that, after a short little contracting gig, and that work just didn't really spell out. My side gig, if you will, right, is I know a lot about building residential and some commercial building construction type stuff to be dangerous. So my clearance and project management skills were used for a year, and then I needed to get out of that. So at the end of the day, then I landed at ISACA September 2014. I was one of the, I think I'm the longest standing original remote employees here. I was in Maryland at the time, moved to Michigan for a few years, came back to the East Coast. It's just kind of where it works for me. So to your point, between my military experience, the training that I was given there, degree programs that span everything from gen ed to architecture, construction management, to computer technologies, to cybersecurity, to then culminated with a workforce master's. Like, I love what it is that we're trying to do collectively to provide alternative pathways and to really kind of be there for the many ways that people get into the profession.
I think you just cued a nice segue into the topic of the day, right? And ISACA does a ton of research, right? Lots of white papers, lots of thought leadership within the space, which I know it's always a read that I enjoy just to pick up and read the white papers and stuff, because it's always good content, man. Because there isn't I think the approach that I've appreciated specifically for you, there isn't a one silver bullet for any of this that's going to solve it. So it is a hybrid of a bunch of things, right? And I think this discussion is timely because we've all seen the news since the first of the year and end of 2022, with just a tremendous amount of layoffs and within I'm going to say tech roles, right? And we all know at this point, and the data has shown that a lot of it has been sales and recruiting, and not necessarily the technical folks that are behind that. So we're going to talk a little bit about hiring and retention trends that we're seeing in 2023. So I'll throw a big question at you. What are you seeing in the market, and what we'll start there. What are you seeing in the market around hiring and retention?
So I think let's take a step back and just look more broadly, right? You did touch on the layoffs, but the global economy at large, I think we're seeing just a large reset for a myriad of reasons. I think here locally within the United States in particular, to combat the pandemic, there were a lot of lawmakers. They did a lot of things. There was a lot of spending that had to be done. And next thing you know, like, those bills become due. There was a lot of incentives that come out, and I think that's one of the things that becomes very real to people as we ride the highs. And we do this as individuals, right? Is if you get an extra, your tax refund comes in and you want to just basically blow it away. But like anything else, the bills come due. Everything's getting more expensive. That's for individuals, businesses. So I think fiscal responsibility and efficiencies is really the name of the game for a lot of businesses right now. So what I would say is, and I'm going to piggyback on what you said, a lot of layoffs are not necessarily in the tech with the actual practitioners. This is not to say that they're not immune to it. And I think there are some instances of that. So hiring is still, I would say, the opportunity is still well above a lot of other occupations right now. However, there's a lot of churn as to where it's needed. And I think that's really something that we can drill into in our conversation here, because as you well know, there is no exact blueprint for staffing cyber teams, right? And I'm going to use cyber in the broadest sense, not just security, right? It is in the broadest context, whether you're a maintainer, a coder, instant responder, or whatnot, engineers, architects, all of that is. A lot of stuff is we're just kind of tossing it up in the air right now, and people are trying to figure things out on the fly. So opportunity still there. I think it's in some ways companies appear to be a little bit more cautious in hiring. Truthfully, we're not immune to this either. Like my own company that I'm at right now, we're even doing that and looking at what makes sense, not only for now, for the future. So if you look at it through the sense of opportunity, I think it could be a good thing. But arguably, like I'm sure it's frustrating for job seekers that are out there, or those that might be on the bubble of whether or not their position could theoretically be eliminated.
I think, kind of jumping in what you said, the COVID and the funds that were made available really was kerosene, right? There was already a fire burning, and they, throw some kerosene on top of it, and it went. So there was, I imagine, a lot of organizations that had a laundry list of special projects that they wanted to get accomplished, and having excess cash and access to people all across the country because of COVID, right? So if I'm a California-based organization and I hire somebody in Missouri, right, that person in California is going to cost me 150, or I'm able to get that person in Missouri for 80, and save half of that and double down and have staff. So I think a lot of the things we're seeing, to your point, bills came due, a lot of folks just, those projects ended, and they had to reassess what the actual overall long-term hiring strategy needed to be, instead of this surge of just, growth of people. So I think it's just a market correction, where it probably would have been if there wasn't a COVID.
So you said something really interesting there, and I think that's something we really need to track, because when I first got hired, I would agree, like that was the mentality, is if you were in a different geographic area of the country, and you can be basically, we get discounted talent, right? Especially if you're like based out of Silicon Valley or whatnot. But, at least some of the trends that I'm looking at right now, when you're looking at like compensation equality, right? Equity across the board, all these things are actually starting to come into the mix. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, because the HR type folks are trying to make things right. Right. We see that there's especially a lot of initiatives on gender equality. But when I'm looking at equality, I'm not going to look at it in a narrow sense. I'm going to look at it across the board. And there have been some unique articles out there that speak to that, is, folks that are in those higher areas. And we'll pick on Silicon Valley, the California sector at large, where it is very expensive to live. I'm not making any mistake about it, but but we've also fostered an environment now where, largely speaking, people don't need to be in the office. We proved it could be done. I think what's the elephant in the room that I don't think that businesses are really talking about right now is that we actually are on the bubble of the commercial real estate market at large. I think that there's a huge tidal wave that's being shored up as best it can, but at some point it's potentially that dam's gonna bust loose, because especially where businesses who were very good in saying, hey, listen, we'll support your employees and working remotely, and that's largely what people are pushing for. Now, granted, we know that there's a tug of war out there, and that's probably the biggest driver that's out there right now, is that companies that are trying to mandate their people to come back into the office, there's other companies that are like, you know what, that's not our business model. We'll surely take you. So I think, again, to your point, like you and I, we were in agreement, right? Like that whole notion of a skills gap, let's push that aside. Like we had a supply issue, but even now I would argue, I'm questioning a lot of that. And I'm sure, in this, we kind of operate in the same circles. I'm not convinced how big the number is, right? Like there's a lot of people talking about this as to whether you have that echo chamber effect of job openings, and where all the search boards are basically magnifying it, and and basically making it unrealistic. That's why our research, we shifted away from the doom and gloom. Like at the end of the day, I have a responsibility to kind of dig in to figure out what the needs are, or it's best we can ascertain from our membership, and then provide some kind of reports that are actionable for folks. So I do think like the pandemic was kind of the beginning, right? And I think anybody who thinks like, well, the pandemic is behind us and our concerns are behind us. No, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think uncertainty is the way of the future, and the onus really becomes on the individual. And that's one of the things that is a generational thing more than anything right now, that I think we have a responsibility to be speaking to our youth.
I mean, we're definitely in agreement on the skills gap.
Yeah.
I think we solved it, right? There are so many ways for somebody to go out and get skills that they would need to get a job, right? And there are free options, cheap options, expensive options. Like, it's not really a skills thing, right? If somebody really wants to get into it, you can go find that. So it really becomes more of how do you now translate those skills in those roles. And I question, right? Like, it's probably to your point. What is this? I looked at cybersecurity while you were chatting. There's 755,000 jobs. As many companies as I've talked to, large and small, I question there's 755,000 jobs that are there. I would speculate one of two things. There 755 is right. We'll give it credit. It's the aggregating the data from job boards, and it's probably more, right? Because there's a ton of jobs that we'll call undocumented at this point that are sitting in small cities and governments and school districts and these counties and municipalities and small manufacturers that haven't even had an opportunity or nowhere to start, quite honestly, where to start to build a cybersecurity program. They might have an IT person who's managing the things, but in terms of like a strategy around cyber and insurance policies and all that stuff that's part of the plan, there's a lot of companies that hopefully that those that are watching or listening you're not shocked by that, but there's a lot that still have a lot of work and a lot of growth. So I'm curious to see how this continues to go with the number, but a lot of our efforts, as is there's a lot of sizzle in saying there's this many jobs, and like this thing is going to solve this thing, or this program will solve all your problems, and like it doesn't work that way. I wish it did. We would be killing it right now if that was the case, but yeah. So what do you forecast as the trends for the rest of 2023? Right, we just wrapped up the first quarter of the year. Blows my mind. It's already April, by the way.
I know.
Finally, but the year's going quick as it always seems to do. But what does the future of 2023 look like in the data you're seeing?
So I'm thinking right now, so I want to preface this by saying that our actual research in the past, you'll recall, the work that we did together, our research actually was released early in the year due to some, other initiatives, namely digital trust. The cybersecurity, the newest data will actually be out later this year, and we're actually going to normalize that with Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It just makes sense. But from the multitude of sources that we're looking at, I think things right now, I think the theme is it's twofold. Businesses, I think, are going to continue to do more with less as best they can. And do their best to try to retain talent. And we could speak to that, momentarily, because I think that's an important thing that needs to be looked at. And then for the career seekers, like we're at this crossroads within both as society, as a workforce, generational stuff, and I'm guilty of it. Like I increasingly don't want to interact with people. Like at the end of the day, like we deal with a lot of stuff and everything, and apps are convenient to do that. But I'm going to tell you, networking has been, forever will be, if you ask me, is going to be the only proverbial silver bullet to getting in the profession right now. So, because you talked about, skills attestation is really the conversation we need to be having. And programs like yourself and the partnerships built with industry and credentialing bodies like ISACA and others, That's the value that's theirs. You can go get skill, go get training from a multitude of sources right now, but who's going to validate that, right? Like everybody's got an opinions on their stuff. And we recognize even within the hiring processes, there's some bias that's in there. And then we were like, oh, hey, let's leverage technology to streamline it. Well, guess what? There's bias baked into that too. So at the end of the day, and that's the sad reality of it is, and you spoke a little bit about, in the government sector, there's different mentalities of where you want to get a job. The government has their one way, and their hiring mechanisms and their resumes and what they're looking for are very different than, your typical resume. But even that, then, why is there, organizations like NIST, NICE that are going out and pushing all these different things? It's because no two people are going to go look for the job the same way. So, cyber camps and, hacking challenges and, capture the flag events and, community groups, the chapters like we have, like that's really where a lot of the deals are going to be done. I think it just boils down to just the basic sales nature of the world. And for a profession that largely struggles with soft skills, I said it and it's real, like that's the one prevailing gap we have in preparing people, is that's what we need to overcome there. So I'll pause there for a second for any follow-on questions.
Yeah, if we were to line up 10 CISOs of, we'll say 10 major companies and say, okay, what is important to you? Is it a degree? Is it a certification? Is it a boot camp, or you're doing these hack the box or these type of competitions? I think we would get pretty close to 10 different answers, right? I have found that CISOs that are on boards or are paid to teach certifications, whether it be ISACA or somebody else, then that particular person has an affinity towards that certification, and there's more value and merit put onto that certification because it's what that person knows, right? If somebody doesn't go down that rabbit hole, then maybe a degree is there. Anything to add for that?
As far back as I can recall here in my current job, like we, not only do we put out thought leadership, we've had our own market research done on different things. And what's interesting is, and I wasn't surprised by it because this goes back, it predates my time at ISACA well early into my career. It's like a 50-50 split on whether you hate certifications or not, right? Like at the end of the day, and part of the struggle, and this is why if they're watered down, they lose value. And so the criteria to take it, the exams need to be challenging. If there is experience attestations, practitioners need to take that stuff seriously and not pencil whip an application. Because would you want that individual working alongside of you? And I think that's one of the mindsets we have to have. But our data historically shows that experience is the number one factor in determining whether somebody's quote unquote well qualified for a job opening. So you can set, and so credentials come up, a little bit below that. And then there's, different options on that, but experience is the first and foremost. So, the group that you're catered to, right, and others, how do we give them experience, right? Like if they don't have it, if you need experience to get a job and you don't have experience, this is the kind of the self-inflicted, wound that we've created within the industry that it's within ourselves to solve too. So a lot of chatter out there about, especially entry-level jobs. We have to do a better job of writing them to that level. The unicorns largely don't exist out in industry. We know we've been picking apart that I and a lot of others out there. Entry-level jobs are exactly that. They're a foot in the door. But there's also a mismatch between the people that are providing the pathways for individuals and the expectations of the market. And you can't, contrary to popular belief, you're not going to come through a college program and reasonably expect a six-figure salary. That's just unreasonable, right? And whereas our market is such, listen, thought leaders and analysts at nature that are it's transactional, right? Their job is basically digital investigation, for a lack of better terms. Like, that is the primary need out there. And I'm just saying, I'm a pause here, and I'm going to stress this. Like, regardless of what you see from CyberSeek or all these other sources, there are certain roles within the cyber workforce that are more susceptible to being automated away than others. And people need to be tracking that real closely, because things like pen testing, which are very sexy and they sell, those are the ones that are arguably very ripe. That for the keyboard enabled stuff, there's still aspects of pen testing that very much need a human. Whereas the analyst side of things, that's the predominant need, and that's not really the sexy part of it. I'd say it's easy 2/3 of what we need out there. Some of that is susceptible, I think, to the lower level stuff, right? But you're still going to need humans that make sense of machine calculations. You have to. Like, that's just, we're not there in that. The other thing that we just need to be mindful is we're in, we were talking about this before the recording live with ChatGPT, right? And let's say, GPT-4 now, since that released, boy, it's just changed a lot of things overnight. Like, what we thought we knew about risks with it, not so much. And there's a lot of really smart people that are scrambling to ascertain, the risks and opportunities. And so much that we've got a bunch of tech leaders, 1,000+, that signed on there, like, asking for a moratorium on research. Don't do anything else with this for at least 6 months till we could get our arms wrapped around this. It's upending everything, that, not just the tech sector, education. There's impacts to it. There's pros and cons to it. Make no mistake, but arguably speak, I don't think it is the minority of people who understand enough to make an informed risk decision for whatever their particular line of business is with it.
Yeah, I think the skills based aspect of that, right? Does a Chat GPT minimize the need for skills for somebody because it's picking up where somebody would have an inherent skill that they would do, and Chat GPT has an automated aspect of creating that skill. So, as solid advice, and I think one of the hardest parts within cyber as a whole is it really is hard to show your work, right? Like, we're not coders, right? If it's coder, I get myself a web page I created, and I have a repository of all the work that I've done, so I can show you what I can do, and you can evaluate the quality of my work. As opposed to cyber, none of that really exists, right? So your solution is do a CTF, do a hack the box, and try to highlight yourself that way and get some accolades, but it's a much harder thing to show your skills. And I think a great segue to the retention. So 30 minutes goes fast, by the way, doesn't it?
It does.
It does. So on the retention side, because I think, skills continue to be a big part of that. A couple weeks ago, we had Eddie Williams on, and we talked about this idea of brain surgeons versus bulldogs, right? And brain surgeons, you're highly specialized people with all the skills, and your bulldogs are your folks that, you can grow into brain surgeons, right? So, what are you seeing companies do to increase retention or continue to grow skills within their folks? Because it's getting more and more competitive, right? Like, a lot of our employers are recognizing that and making increases to starting salaries just because they want to be able to attract. And now, again, you're competing against, you mentioned earlier, the remoteness of things. And if we're a large organization and having that consideration, man, we should go back into the office. Like, that has a huge impact on retention and whatnot for folks. So, what are you seeing employers do?
So I think, there's a couple things. First and foremost, I think training their own people who want to move into cyber. There's something we said, the research shows that, our research, a strong mitigation for not having enough qualified applicants is to find people within the company who understand your business, your culture, all that, and actually cross-train them in. So there's that's happening. You talked about salary, though, and better starting salaries, and that becomes a double-edged sword, because what the market has largely come to acknowledge is that the only way you're really going to attain market value is to leave your job. And I think that's the wrong message that's out there. So there is no one size fits all for this. I think some companies are going above and beyond. I advocate, that, this 10 years since I've left uniform. So 30 years since I've hit, any part of the professional workforce. It's not just about salary. And I think that's increasingly important right now to acknowledge with not only our youth, but career changers. I think that more flexible compensation structures are necessary right now. I think that there's a lot of onus that goes on the HR or people and culture related teams to actually figure out what it is that what makes it work, right? When I was a trainer, right, that acronym WIFM, what's in it for me? What are those things that drive you? So, but a quick thing within the IT related stuff, let's set salary aside, because money isn't everything to everybody. Stability does carry something, but there's immediate opportunity for businesses that we saw that there was disparity between those that paid for certification for their employees and then the maintaining of those. And the maintaining was lower by, I think if memory serves me right, it was about 24 percentage points. Immediate opportunity to close that gap, because if them getting the certification was important enough for you to invest in them, then you should also be helping them maintain it, because the administrative and financial burden is real. And let's just be real. Companies can take that stuff and write it off. Whereas a lot of the individuals, and speaking here in the US in particular, that last tax code revamp it fundamentally altered a lot of the write-offs. So businesses still have it, the individual maybe not so much, depending on their situation, but it's the little things that count.
You just reminded me to do my taxes, by the way. So appreciate that.
Really, Tony?
I've got we got 12 days, we're good.
12 days, yeah.
No, I mean, it's an interesting conundrum, right? And I think, you've alluded to it a couple times around the generational thing. And there's just, we have 4 distinct humans in the workforce between boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, right? And priorities are shifting. Importance of work-life balance, I think, are shifting. Which is where you see the trend and upward mobility around like gig economies and things like DoorDash and other, I can control my time and energy and how much I choose. I was, scrolling through the maybe banned soon, maybe not banned soon TikTok, right? And there was a woman on there who, started an online notary career and made $17,000 last month doing online notary. I'm like, kudos to you from, and took a week off in between that of just, created some curriculum of how to teach others how to do it. That's, I don't know about you, but that's a pretty solid salary. And then back to your, the tax thing where now I have a business, all of my things, or I can write it off in different ways and I can make the tax code work better for me and probably have a lot less tax burden at the end of the day for doing all those things. So I think, companies are not just competing with other companies now, they're competing with work-life balance, they're competing with remote work, they're competing with, salaries and benefits. So it's a tough road ahead. And I don't know that I have a solid recommendation, but at the end of the day, companies generally win by taking care of their people, investing in their people, and being a good team player, a good employer that people want to go and work at. And I think that stands volumes, and there's a lot of good examples behind it. So, all right, we're at time, man. So, the last question for everybody is always, what advice would you give to those that are looking to level up their cybersecurity career?
Networking. I alluded to it earlier. things are moving way too fast. So you have to take your career. Like there was this whole concept of lifelong learning, right? And it's really transitioned to lifelong employability. So the onus actually shifts to us as individuals, and that's not necessarily popular for some folks. You got to take ownership of that, and sometimes upward means not in the current location. So I think that's one of the things you talked about with the gig economy. I think maybe the youngest generation is, a little bit better at that, but therefore, myself included, I think that for a while people were risk averse, and maybe this is changing a little bit. So that's my advice.
Well, John, I appreciate the time today. I appreciate the insight, the friendship. And I always know if I ever have to, if I got something gnawing at me that I want to get off my chest, I call John, and John listens and gives me a straight shooter answer. And I appreciate it. For those that are interested, I encourage you to reach out to John on LinkedIn, make a connection. He's got a ton of great resources. He puts out a lot of great content on his post as well. A lot of stuff that they're doing at ISACA, and there's a lot of incredible content that you guys create. So I appreciate it, and I know I reference it quite a bit. So next week's show, we're gonna change the tone a little bit here, and we're gonna go a little different. So we're gonna talk about online safety for kids. So the guest will be the chief of staff for CyberUp, Amber Lowry. She's fantastic. We've been hanging out, man, almost 7 years now. So she's been with CyberUp from the beginning, but has done a really great job because she has 2 young sons that, there's a lot of risks associated with throwing an 8 and a 5-year-old on the internet and say, go, you have the world at your fingertips. So she's got some best practices and advice for other parents if you're looking to make sure your children are navigating the dangers of the internet in a positive way. So excited for that discussion. But John, thank you so much for today. Thanks for everybody for tuning in and listening. Till next time, stay tuned. Have a great week.